going to be a longer one. So if your YouTube feed looked anything like mine on January 1st, it was probably spammed by death. Steamboat Willie, aka Mickey Mouse's first entrance into the public domain. Last year we saw something similar with Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, a horror movie capitalizing on Winnie the Pooh's entrance into the public domain. The movie was met with mixed critical reviews, but it did the most important thing. Through its novelty factor, it managed to make profit. Lots of sweet, sweet profit. Now, as more iconic characters head into the public domain, the prospect of extending copyright seems increasingly implausible. Therefore, big questions loom. How are perceptions of characters like Mickey Mouse, Winnie the Pooh, and even Superman going to change? Are we on the brink of a shift where corporations lose their grip on these characters? And can Mickey Mouse be detached from Disney and become a universal symbol? Before we plunge into the potential changes, let's dissect the current system of copyright and how the status quo got established. Copyright, in essence, grants creators exclusive access to profit from their creations, dictating how they're altered, published, and distributed. It's a system designed to provide creators with financial incentives and safeguard against someone just stealing your idea. On the other hand, the public domain comes into play when this exclusive period expires, allowing everyone to build upon and enhance the work, so that someone can take a story about a detective in London and make a modern day version where he does drugs and is played by a guy who cannot say the word penguin.
Benedict to say the word penguin.
These are Fiordland crested penguins, named after this corner of South New Zealand. So why are these woodlands so attractive to penguins?
The United States then adopted this model of copyright into their constitution in 1787, more on why they are important in a bit. But this established Lockean principles of property firmly within copyright, where a work a person does from their own body is a form of property. Initially, the term for copyright was around 28 years, and a further allowance was given to extend for a further 28. However, in 1976, media corporations successfully advocated using growth and competition within Europe to extend copyright to the author's life plus 50 years, reinforcing the power that corporations have over copyright. This shift had global implications on copyright, as US companies dominate the top 10 media franchises worldwide. Also, their membership into the World Trade Organization ensures not only the global consumption of their characters in an ever globalized world, but also the protection of those characters' copyright on an international scale. This established the cultural capital the US held within the realm of copyright.
Okay, before we go on, let's make sure we understand two important terms: social capital and cultural capital. Social capital means the value we get from having good connections with others. In business, this could be relationships, reputations, or assets that help run things smoothly. This idea is important for corporations and popular characters because, like how having good connections helps a business, having well known characters or brands can help a company be more successful by attracting customers and other partners. Secondly, cultural capital. As Bordeaux explains, this comes in three types: embodied, objectified, and institutionalized. When we talk about copyrighted characters, we're mainly talking about objectified cultural capital. This means things like toys or clothes with characters on them that represent cultural value that can be owned. So when corporations own a lot of these kinds of products with character that everybody knows, like Mickey Mouse or Superman, the corporations themselves become culturally important just by being associated with the merchandise of these characters. Therefore,
Companies like Disney recognized that audience gravitate towards established brands and launched significant marketing campaigns to make characters like Mickey Mouse even more prominent in the public consciousness. The strategy was straightforward. If you enjoyed Mickey Mouse, you probably enjoyed Disney as a whole, and that extended to other Disney productions. A great example of this is the MCU, right? Where most people who watched one film of the MCU, who liked one film of the MCU, probably went on to see other MCU characters and other MCU movies. So the cultural capital that one character generated helped them earn more revenue by diverting them to other things that the MCU made. Therefore, to safeguard the social capital of these characters, corporations, mainly Disney, lobbied once again. And just 5 years before Mickey Mouse's expiration into the public domain, the copyright term extension of 1998 was enacted. This made it so that copyright was prolonged to life of author plus 70 years. A move so audacious that it is literally commonly called the Mickey Mouse Protection Act. Now, to be fair, corporations did cite increasing globalization and increasing lifespans as justification. And while there's some truth to that, there's an underlying hypocrisy in their motives. As corporations like Disney have built their entire empires adapting public domain fairy tales like Cinderella, like Snow White, like Sleeping Beauty. And now they want to ensure an extension of copyright so they can protect these adaptations and not allow other people to borrow and build from. Huh. Even Disney's 100-year celebration was centered around a movie based on fairy tale.
This film is celebrating 100 years of Disney animation.
Okay, now let's talk about evergreen characters, a term I made up. I define these characters as ones which have existed under a singular corporation since their inception. They remain profitable, sometimes even more so since their origin, and are constantly reworked for modern audiences while still preserving their core. They're incredibly valuable. Corporations like Disney understand that these characters hold cultural and economic capital. Corporations want to retain the social capital that these characters possess because everyone knows them and therefore make continuous adaptations and marketing efforts to make them relevant. But what happens when corporations no longer have sole access to them, aka the public domain? Okay, so you might be thinking now, yes, copyright exists, and yes, corporations choose how we see certain characters, but I often see fan-made interpretations of Mickey Mouse, of Winnie the Pooh, of multiple other characters that are still in the public domain. Why doesn't that stop? That's where we get to fandoms. Because this story doesn't only involve corporations, but fandoms too that have played a significant role here. Fandoms have been around for centuries. In the 1890s, Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts were so hardcore that they pestered Arthur Conan Doyle in any way they could to write more Sherlock Holmes stories. Very much like toxic fandoms of today. And then you fast forward to the 1960s, where Star Trek fans held conventions in which they shared their own fan fiction and fan art and contributed to fanzines. Then the internet happened. And with the World Wide Web booming, fandoms now had access to platforms such as AO3, fanfiction.net, Tumblr, Wattpad, DeviantArt, and YouTube, making fan art and fan media distribution easier than ever. Then, the rapid dissemination of fan media, coupled with user anonymity, because you can't really tell who anyone is on the internet unless they choose to tell you, rendered corporations powerless to really intervene on copyright. While corporations do intervene when it comes to commercial projects, they largely do not care about low profile, non commercial use of intellectual property that comes within the realm of fan media. It's helped by the fact that fans engaged in these creative endeavors don't do it for commercial gain, but to contribute to the collective knowledge through their unique interpretations and ideas around these characters. Henry Jenkins, a seminal scholar in fan media, refers to this as participatory culture, asserting that it fosters thriving fandom which reward participation with social capital. There's a great example of this with platforms like Wattpad and AO3, where people who contribute fan fictions into fandoms raise their own profile if their work is good enough, if their work really captures the essence of these characters. There are even feuds between authors within fandom on who does it better.
On June 9th, 2003, Miss Scribe ascended to the upper echelons of the Harry Potter fandom. She was made a mod on Fiction Alley.
My 2010 Wattpad girlies can definitely vouch for this. Jenkins contends that this participatory culture aids in growing and maintaining fan interest, even when the corporations that own these characters are doing nothing with them. Therefore, even though Warner Brothers Discovery and Mr. David Zaslav refuse to make more Ben 10 content that I desperately need, the reason the fandom stays alive and my interest in the character stays alive is because of people on YouTube who keep talking and making more videos about the character. Therefore, fans not only acquire social capital from these fandoms, but also contribute back to them, back to these intellectual properties that they borrow from, utilizing these evergreen characters as a source of social capital in the absence of a good, healthy public domain. This social capital can then be turned into monetary gain, as exemplified by 50 Shades of Grey, which started out as Twilight fan fiction that became so popular that the author was able to just change it a bit and create a worldwide bestseller. She was undoubtedly helped by the existing Twilight fandom, but also helped to keep it alive. It is crucial to bear in mind, however, that it is still corporations that wield the power to shape the public perception of these characters. Any project that gains substantial traction and seeks to fundamentally reimagine these evergreen characters is likely to face shutdown, as the key for corporations is to preserve the core identity of these characters to ensure that they're always profitable. So we understand that both corporations and fandom help make evergreen characters evergreen. But what happens when this relationship changes and fandoms can both commercialize their fan media and borrow from the public domain with immunity? Well, for this, we turn back to a dear old detective friend from London, Sherlock Holmes. See, this is what's called foreshadowing. I am good at this now. Anyway, Sherlock Holmes is perhaps the first true evergreen character. He was featured in 56 different short stories and became so popular that Arthur Conan Doyle began to despise him, with Doyle saying that Sherlock Holmes overshadowed his more serious work. So, in 1893, he decided to kill Holmes with the famous The Final Problem story, saying, "If I had not killed him, he would have certainly killed me." Hardcore. However, fans were so outraged by that 20,000 people immediately canceled their subscription to Strand magazine, which featured Sherlock Holmes stories. The backlash was so strong that Doyle had to bring back the character and literally retire him on a farm. This makes it clear that fandoms have had a huge influence in keeping evergreen characters relevant for more than a century. Moreover, they also influenced how we think of the detective today. Sherlock Holmes' more hardcore drug habits and antisocial tendencies come from later authors such as Myers, not from Doyle himself. His Inverness coat and deerstalker caps weren't in Doyle's original descriptions, but in illustrations by Sidney Edward Paget. It was later actors who emphasized certain characters and de-emphasized others. And even his most famous saying,
"Elementary, my dear Watson."
was never said in the original story, but worked through in subsequent adaptations. The true Sherlock Holmes was the stories we made along the way. And this shows you not only the importance of the public domain, but how fandoms can help the constant reinvention of a character and keep that character interesting for centuries. But the obvious issue here is that the landscape has significantly changed since 1903, and corporations now wield unprecedented power over intellectual property. It's naive to think like Disney and Warner Brothers were just ceased producing media featuring characters like Mickey or Superman after their copyright expired. Their strategy is to consistently create mass marketable media around these characters to ensure a constant association between the characters and the company. And they have already shown examples. When Disney encountered Andy Serkis's live action Jungle Book project, they countered back with their 2016 version, making it more quickly and just marketing better because they have more resources and monopolies. This ensured that their Jungle Book adaptation was still the definitive Jungle Book adaptation. So what prevents studios from just keeping on doing this? In reality, nothing. They possess immense economic influence over these characters and will try and keep them prominent to themselves, especially as people don't actively track copyright changes and might just view these other adaptations as illegitimate knockoffs, as lesser products. However, fans now have the freedom to create and commercialize their own adaptations, make their own Mickey Mouse x Winnie the Pooh fan fiction, and saturate the market with these. And yes, this will definitely result in some lazy, bad adaptations, but the sheer abundance will diminish the economic viability of evergreen characters. So, as these characters become less economically viable for corporations to keep fighting for, it stops being a question of if, but when. Because even if corporations like Disney can overshadow one big adaptation, they cannot keep doing it against hundreds of smaller ones, like we see with modern copyright today. The variety of adaptations, once the horror ones subside, will set mainstream precedents, reshaping characters away from their original depiction. Moreover, as major corporations follow suit, this transformative trend is likely to intensify further, challenging this mainstream monopolistic structure of corporations owning certain characters. Looking back at Sherlock Holmes once again, where audiences and fans made these reinterpretation of these characters. Imagine what these stories could do if they were popularized through platforms like TikTok and YouTube, with everyone making small changes and just blowing them up into the mainstream. It will fundamentally change how we think of these characters. With characters opening up to new interpretations, a new testing ground emerges for the success of new adaptations. It makes it much more harder for corporations to keep pushing this one single version of these characters. As we've seen in the past, the key to making successful reinventions of these characters is to keep that core intact, the core that draws people to these characters, while still making fundamental changes that push forward how we think of them. So now, as more people have the ability to do so without any actual repercussions, the questions of will corporations that own these evergreen characters continue to produce the only legitimate version is much more vague. And it's much more likely that fandoms can redefine these characters. And then, maybe in 50 years, Mickey Mouse becomes a global cultural product that anyone can use. Instead, just a Disney one. But, jab tak ke liye, thank you and Allah.